Louis needed to reform after the disastrous harvests and devastating wars. He tried to pass his reforms first through the Parlement, as mentioned previously, but he didn't know what to do afterwards. Since the Parlement wouldn't directly challenge his authority, he couldn't use the Lit de Justice to force them to pass the bill. The ministry pores over law scrolls, and they find an odd clause where the king can call an assembly of notables, basically a bunch of people that the king can appoint to force a bill to pass. Louis picks a group of 144 people, a few archbishops, and a noble called Lafayette. Even though Louis handpicked his notables, they still refused to grant him reforms. They pretended it was all about liberty and freedom from tyrannical overreach of the government. I mean, don't you agree, Lafayette? Hero of the American Revolution? Nah, to be honest, they just wanted to keep their titles and money, really. So Louis, shouldn't we give this reform package that affects every aspect of the kingdom to a more representative body? What are you thinking? I don't know. The Estates General, perhaps? So Louis calls the Estates General. The Estates General was a gathering of the three estates of France: those who prayed, those who fought, and those who worked. Influenced by the Enlightenment, the three groups individually decide they should come prepared with a list for everything that they want to change. One of the things that the estates wanted to solve was how the Estates General would go. Some people in the third and second estate wanted to vote by head. Louis gets told this. He doesn't want to anger the peasants or undermine his nobles, so he sends a decree saying that the third estate, however many delegates they decide to have, are allowed to double, and each decide which representatives they are going to send to the Estates General. It's the 5th of May. The Estates General starts, with all three estates in one room. Jacques Necker steps onto the stage to thundering applause. However, even though this was a monumental occasion, and the first time the Estates General had met in 100 years, his speech was super technical and super boring. I wonder why. After some more boring speeches, they were dismissed, and without the one thing the third estate wanted to hear, whether they were going to vote by head or vote by order. The next day, all three estates showed up and went to separate rooms to confirm that everybody from their estate that gathered here was actually supposed to be here. The third estate goes, Hey guys, I thought we were voting by head and not by order. Why are you in separate rooms? First and second estate don't reply. One guy stands up and says, You know, we're 97% of the population. We should do our own thing. Screw those guys. We are the legitimate body in France, because we represent the 97% of people in France. And then they started registering everybody that came into the room that wanted to join. Somebody says, Hey, we should get a better name. I mean, we're not the third estate. We're like a national body. The national body of France. We need a name. How about the representative body of the people and of the majority in France? Nah. How about the large part of the body of France separated by the smaller body of France that refuses to join us? After a bunch of more stupidly ass long names, a famous clergyman named Abbye Sieyes suggested, How about we call ourselves the National Assembly? Having realised that nobody else could remember what the hell that other guy said, they said, yeah, why not? A couple of days after they called themselves the National Assembly, the First Estate, made up mostly of parish priests, call a vote to join the National Assembly. It passes, but barely with a majority. On the 17th of May, they declare themselves the National Assembly. Those fancy archbishops went to the king and said, Do something, you waste of silk and fabric. So the king decides to hold a royal session. Royal session's basically an assembly, but the king heads it, and he's the main authority in charge. They were going to hold this royal session on the 20th, when the third estate was going to welcome the first estate into their National Assembly, in the room where they were going to welcome. So the 20th of June arrives, and the National Assembly delegates turn the corner. They see armed guards blocking the entrance, saying they can't come in. Being too angry to listen, they refuse to be separated, and walk around the palace grounds for about 2 hours until they find a tennis court. A man named Jean Abbye stands up and says, "We should swear an oath never to separate. Wherever these delegates standing in the room before me are convened, this is the National Assembly. We will not be disbanded, and we will continue our mission to meet until the king is bound by a constitution." A few hours later, they get told that the king is holding a royal session, and so decide to attend. They open the door and sit. Louis stands and basically says, "You want the National Assembly? You want your own body? My taxes are legal. You don't have any power to decide whether my taxes are legal, and that anything you've declared in that room is null and void." After this, he presents a bunch of reforms. Reforms to taxation, the grain trade. However, after basically being told to fuck off by Louis, they weren't in the best mood. Meanwhile, more people joined the assembly, including the Duc d'Orléans, the king's brother, on the 24th of June. And on the 27th, Louis admits defeat and says to the rest of the First and Second Estates, "I order you to join the National Assembly and vote by head."